What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Today we have Aaron. How the heck are you, buddy?
Hey, buddy. How are you, Devin?
Wonderful, thank you. So today we are going to be talking about hydrogen peroxide, or H202, and some of the benefits and uses on reef tanks. I've personally been using it to fight algae for ages. More recently would be for frag dips. I know Humblefish has been experimenting with treating fish with it, and you used it to deal with some more hardcore disease in your tank, so it should be a good one today.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for having me on. And, the idea of hydrogen peroxide is anything but new for anyone who's been in the hobby a hot second. But I think its applications is evolving a little bit. And I remember one of the first times I saw your video when you were using it to inject bubble algae in your little nanotech. And that was 3 or 5 years ago, and I remember you talking about that and seeing some of the conversations look at what it can do from a nutrient control and for different types of algae.
Mm-hmm. And now I also know some other people that literally just have it on a doser to their tank as a bit of a algae prevention. So this is another thing we can get into in a bit, because it oxidizes, similar, not quite the same, but similar idea, which you can get from like ozone or UV to an extent. So it can actually help with clarity and a few other things. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing is, so quick spoiler alert, I had Uronema, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But when looking at oxidizers and what could work as an algicide, very quickly I found that hydrogen peroxide is an effective use as an algicide, as an oxidizer, but more importantly, it's much safer than using bleach. Like, obviously, you wouldn't pour bleach into your tank, with stuff in it and everything. But being able to put it in the state that I had, it began to influence it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so I guess starting with the most common one, I originally started using, actually even in the freshwater days, I used this to kill off algae. Yeah. Now there is one thing that I've always done, hair algae or turf algae, a lot of those, they'll grow in the rock, and generally I would manually pull it off, and then I would spot treat this. And now to do that, I would take a syringe, I would turn off all my flow, and I would inject it just, a couple mils above it. And you can kind of see the little fuzzy, in the summertime when you got the heat waves coming off of the road, it looks like that. You'll see that little bit of a distortion there.
Yeah, exactly. The fresh water against the salinity.
Yeah, so I do that, and I'll basically just spot treat it right where the algae is, and it will kill off the roots. It might not happen first treatment, but usually after a couple treatments, it's going to kill off that algae. And because most people pull it out and it grows back again. So
when you were dosing it, did you just use the 1 ml syringe with the tip, or did you add another tip on it, like the F-Stasia tip, the metal tip?
I just use this. Yep. So as my prior general rule, I always went with 1 mil per 10 gallons as kind of a safe dose. I think you might actually be able to push that a little bit higher, but that's what previously I've always done. It's a nice safe level to do.
And again, looking at some of the research, I found that 10 ml to be a good standardized dose, but it also depends what type of tank you had. If you have an LPS tank, you can definitely push that a little bit more. In my experience with it, I found with a SPS dominated tank, it was a little bit harder to do more than that, because it pissed off the sticks, and I found that they just closed right up, and they weren't happy with the hydrogen peroxide so close to them.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's true. Okay, now type of coral definitely makes a difference, like you said. Acros are a little more sensitive. They can handle more of a diluted dip. So if you're doing this for an LPS or a mushroom or a zoas, those type of things, it could be a good way to kill off bacteria, right? So if there's a bacterial infection, that could be a dip. Now, more sensitive corals, I would dilute it more with water. So
yeah, and definitely don't try it with any soft skins either. It will.
Yeah, that's bad.
It will just wipe them right out. So just putting that out there for those of you who might see something, or you have a deep water, soft skin coral, and you're like, oh, there's algae around it, turf algae. How am I going to get it off? Don't try this method at home. It's
deep waters don't fare well.
Deep water, no, they don't fare well to it at all.
What you could do, however, though, is I don't have a little paintbrush, but if you have a little paintbrush and paint the frag plug with the peroxide and kill it off. So you're not touching the coral per se, but you're killing all the algae that's on the plug. I've done that.
What I used to use actually is the beard trimmers that you can get, and they come with a little black brush that is really stiff bristles. Oh, yeah. That's what I use when putting the hydrogen peroxide, because I find the toothbrush, even a hard bristle, is too soft. So I found those like buzz trimmer bristle brushes to be just way stiffer. So it's a little tip there.
That's a good way to do it. Okay, Zoas, just because that's a popular one. Zoas, I do it for about a minute to a minute and a half, and I have done it 100% straight peroxide. Zoas can handle it, mushrooms can handle it, and just straight up peroxide. Your frag plugs the next day will be shiny white. They'll look brand new. It'll kill off all the algae on it. If I'm doing acros or more sensitive stuff, I'd do more of a dip that's around 50-50. Probably do half tank water, half peroxide.
Yeah, that's what I would do as well, that 50-50. And, I was also just looking at the time for it. If I noticed distress on the corals, I'd pull it out pretty quickly. And then I would use a turkey baster with tank water just to like squirt it all off and everything, as opposed to taking that frag on the plug and putting it into the tank.
Yep.
Some of that hydrogen peroxide will go into the tank. Now, most of you know that within 30 minutes, the hydrogen peroxide will just become H2O water. But, you've got that little bit of buffer time that if there's anything on, the surface there, plug or coral, that, for that period of time, it may act as an irritant.
Yeah. Now, with that, so it does help prevent algae. I had a buddy that swore by it, and he just literally had on a dosed 10 or 15 mils a day to his 160, 180 gallon tank. And he swore by it. He's like, nope, never had an algae issue, nothing else. So, that is an option. I've personally never put on a doser, but.
Yeah, I was talking to a buddy of mine who was telling me that one of the LFSs that he knows uses it in their shop for a maintenance dosing regime. So again, going more towards the cleaning application of it, but you look at it anything from your at-home plug to going to be able to buy it in store or to use it at an LFS. It's a super cheap solution to deal with some particular type of algae because it's such a strong oxidizer.
And dollar stores, pharmacies, grocery stores, it's like $2 or $3 for a jug of it. So it's cheap.
Yeah, this is where it gets into some of the nuances. So you've got the 3% there, and that's usually what you can get from any exactly from any store that you might go to. Yeah. However, they do make a whole slew of other ranges from 3 to 5 to 10 to 15, 25, 20. I saw 27, 34, 35, and some of those nuances actually are the grades. So not all of it is the same. So like actually the one that we get for home use is not pharmaceutical grade. It's not lab grade. It's just, I don't even know, home use. But you can buy more food grade and then lab grade that basically has much less of the contaminants in it. And again, a little spoiler, but I got mine from Lab Alley. And if you go on their website, you can see the different varieties they have in the container sizes. And you can see some of the impurities that they have in there depending on both the grade and the percentage of hydrogen peroxide. But for most uses, that 3% that you get at home will be more than sufficient.
Yep, agreed. 35% is just the fumes of bleach your hair. So it actually is used to bleach hair. So that is another use of peroxide. That's the hairdresser. If you're going for the blonde look, that's what's happening. So
yeah,
it's potent.
And I sent you some pictures recently of my fingers, even wearing gloves. And the 34% that I was using, it just tore right through them and left my fingertips and a spot on my hand, just like absolutely eaten up by this stuff. So it is dangerous stuff. We've talked about wearing goggles and suiting up for these things. The stronger you go, definitely think about adding some safety measures in place. It'll save you later.
Yeah, especially what you use, 35%?
I use the 34% lab grade. Yeah,
3% is made to put on cuts and stuff if you have things. So that's safe, right? But that's 10 times more potent. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember looking at the math behind the incremental for every percent, and it wasn't a straight 1-for-1 increase, but it was like pretty remarkable. And I think this is something that Humble Fish has talked a lot about in the use for dosing and for some fish particular diseases. And I think that people are going to start looking at it as an option either for microdosing for algae or start to look at it as a parasite removal application within the reef tanks.
So interesting one that brought up with Humble Fish. So he actually has been experimenting with H202 bath more or less for the fish to treat velvet and brook in a thing. So it's basically a fish bath, and I believe he uses, let me just quickly look it up, 5 mil per liter, 20 mil per 1 gallon. is what he does in his thing. So he'll run them through that to get rid of that. And I guess the idea is it stunts or kills or knocks off those irritants or whatever disease attacking the fish. So it gives them relief from it.
Yeah, the way that I looked at it after putting it in my tank, and my tank looked like a jacuzzi when I poured it in. So like I can imagine it at the cellular level of what it would do to the gills or the alveoli on the gills. It basically just dislodging any parasite or bacterium that are on there, and allowing the fish to swim a little freer and to obviously breathe a little bit easier over time. And again, because it's clear, looks like water, doesn't have much of a scent, I think we forget how both helpful and dangerous it can be.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. So reminder, any of the non-aquarium products, aka DIY stuff, or your 35% stuff, I mean, wearing gloves, doing all that stuff is always a good idea. I remember Chris talking about when he's using some hydroxide, his skin was all like buggery for like a month or two until it recovered just from some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So like
that stuff can be nasty. Obviously, the stronger you go, take those precautions.
Exactly. So I know reefers sometimes can get a little slack on that, but it is a lot of stuff you use, especially if it's not designed for the aquarium, can potentially be a lot stronger chemical, right? So
yeah,
food for thought.
Exactly. Yeah, but for those who have had forms of Brochinella or white spot or velvet, there's definitely a lot of great information on humblefish, and you can see some stuff even back in the day, Reef Central, that are talking about that. I think Greg Carroll, I remember seeing something way back when that you had helped to support on that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff written about it, and you can go down several hours of rabbit holes through reading about it, and I think that's a good thing. I think that just shows where the use of the product is going and how we can begin to see it slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we got bacteria infections, killing off algae, which is my main use for it. You can use it for algae prevention to an extent by dosing it to a tank. Now, you had one of the nastier of the fish diseases.
I would say the nastiest. I don't wish this on any enemy. Like I don't have any. But if I had an enemy, I would not wish this disease on them at all. This parasite, Uronema, and there's a few different varieties of it, it's bad stuff. It really is. And so I got mine from some chromis, also known as chromis disease. And I lost all 15 chromis on it when I was first cycling my tank. And it was ready to go. I was super happy, put those bad boys in there, and they just developed, that ulcer like on the side of them. And then it just literally eats their way into their brain, and then they die. And sadly, I lost them. But I remembered enough of my knowledge of like fish parasites and diseases, like what it could be. And very quickly found on the internet that, sure enough, it was chromis disease and Uronema. And so I reached out to Eli over at Aquabiomics and said, hey, is this something you can test for? He got back to me. He said, yeah, sure. So I got a sample and I sent off to them, and they confirmed it that I had 5% of 4 or 5 different strains of Uronema in the tank. I'm just like, oh, man. Yeah. And at first I thought, well, 5% out of 100 isn't that bad. It's fine. I can deal with it. And then, I get the email from him saying, 5% is a lot, right? You want, if you're going to have it and you're going to leave it, it should be under 1% or 0.1% in the system. So I was like, great. What am I going to do? And so I kind of just left it for a little bit. And this was, early to mid December last year. And started talking to some friends to get different perspectives of what to do. So I spent a lot of time with the folks at Humblefish in the community, asking them for their perspectives. Andrew, you're on here, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and your input on that as well. With the hydrochloroquine equivalent to use on that, that was definitely a really interesting path to look and to explore. But in the end, I actually decided that hydrogen peroxide was going to be a stronger oxidizer compared to bleach, because California is going through a drought right now. I felt guilty draining the tank, 300 gallons, filling it back up, or putting the bleach on it, filling it up, drain, fill, drain a few times. There was like 1,000 gallons of water just wasted, and I just didn't feel like that's a responsible thing to do. And so I wanted to look at what would be a way that I could continue to use the water that I had and just kind of tweak it, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I found Lab Alley, and they would ship to me, and I found some others online that were part of a study that was done specifically looking at Uronema, but I think it was coming from Washington, and the cost to ship it from Washington was just ridiculous. Like, the product itself wasn't too bad, but the cost to ship was. And Lab Alley is in Texas, and it was just an extra $35 for a handling fee because it's a corrosive solution. And I got it within 2 days, and now I got this 5-gallon drum of hydrogen peroxide, and I'm like, oh boy, what am I going to do here?
That's a good stockpile.
Well, surprisingly, more than half of it's gone, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I said, okay, what do I need to do to be able to eradicate it? And knowing that the tank couldn't go feral, and knowing that it could live off detritus and stuff in the water, I basically had to let go of all of the rock that I had cycled for years, all of the media that I had from different brands in there, and I had to toss it all out. So that like tore me, because there was 7-8 years worth of stuff that I had accumulated and used from tank to tank, and unfortunately it was gone. Yeah. So then it's like, okay, do I leave the sand? Do I take the sand out? And then I decided, it's better to remove the sand, put new sand into it, just to make it a little bit easier for the hydrogen peroxide to work more effectively. So I vacuumed it all out. I used the net, scooped it out. Again, I'm wearing gloves and stuff at this point, even before I put the hydrogen peroxide in, because I knew that I had Uronema. I didn't want to transfer it to my other tanks in the house. And so I was being super careful, pulled all that up, pulled all the media, topped up the water, and kind of just said, okay, Hail Mary. I found a dosing application, set of instructions that Humble Fish had posted on some of the research that was done, I believe, in Hawaii. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try it. And it was a dosing every other day. And I worked out what the volume would be for my size tank. And I kind of just poured it in for that one day. And I left my UV sterilizer. So I have an 80-watt Pentair UV. I left that on because it was either I have to pull it out and I have to completely wash the whole thing out, which would be a real pain, or because it was behind the tank, or I just let it go through and see what it does. And so I pulled out the skimmer, I pulled out all of the other media reactors, and I left the I left the UV running. Poured in the first batch of hydrogen peroxide, and I won't give the specific amount on here, but you can look on Humble Fish to see what was done. But it was not a lot. I'll put it at that. And it actually immediately I saw all of the pods in the tank just basically roll up and die. And so the whole surface of the water was all full of pods who just didn't make it. And then bristle worms shortly there followed, floating to the surface, and all those kicked the bucket that were in the rock. And it continued to bubble for at least 24 hours.
Oh wow, that's quite a while.
Yeah, and I posted some pictures of it, back in the day, and I think they're still on my Instagram. But it continued to bubble away, and then so you let it go for the day, and then you follow on the next day. And so I continued to follow every other day for 10 days. So I had
Quick question. Was there any fish or coral, or was this just the rockscape and the equipment now that was left?
It was just the rockscape.
Okay.
All of the chromis had died. I did have 2 other frostbite clownfish that I did pull out in a separate quarantine tank, and I've been treating them. And I'll know soon whether or not that's safe or not. I'm getting those results back in the next round of aquabiomics.
Nice.
So I poured it in. Everything got nuked into the tank. It was just annihilation, everything that was in there. The water did turn green for a while, so I put in a 5-micron filter sock into it, and that within 6 or 7 hours, it pulled off all of the particulates that were in the water, and it was some filthy, stinky stuff. It really was. Yeah, but for me, that was just the start of it. I was like, okay, now how do I continue to take it to the next level? And I think a lot of this was just uncharted territory of my mission for annihilation. And I don't use those words lightly, especially with everything going on now, but I wanted to take care of the Uronema in the tank. And so I started looking at how temperature plays a factor into parasites. And I found some scientific paper that it was based in Australia that different parasites such as Uronema cannot take a high level of temperature. And so I was like, you know what? Let me put some thermometers in there. So I put 4 500-watt thermometers in there. I put garbage bags on the top of the tank, and I put a moving blanket, and I just wrapped the whole tank up.
Yeah.
Greg, great point on bleach, and I'll get to that in a second. Temperature, it was up at 100 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius, and I just let it go for a week, and I just let it continue to kill anything that might have been in there. And I left all the pumps in there, and I just jacked them up to 100% because I wanted to make sure that the rocks and stuff in there would have all the surface area that was exposed to be exposed to the hydrogen peroxide.
Yep.
And so after I did that for a few days, I actually took out all of the aquascaping, and I bought one of those like pump bottles that you might use to like at an apple orchard to put stuff in, or just like it's like exactly one of those you just pump and then you can spray it. And I pulled out all of the rock and I put it outside. Southern California, it wasn't too cold, so I was able to do that. And I sprayed the whole thing down with hydrogen peroxide, flipped it over, let it dry overnight. And then I put it back in. I figured, the tank's been hot enough, it's been dosed enough, the rock itself has now been saturated with hydrogen peroxide. I should be good to go. But I thought to myself, I'm going to take it one step further, thinking on the line of oxidization. And so I called the folks over at Ozotech and talked to Steve, and I was like, okay, what are your thoughts on applying ozone into the tank and what might it do? So after a good back and forth, I said, well, it won't hurt the system. Again, it was nice outside. I can open everything up, and I can actually add a fair amount of ozone into the tank without worrying. So I left the ozone on. I have the Poseidon 200, and before I was running it at between 4 and 6. I was able to, I cranked it way up, and I did it like 8, 9 for 24 hours, and it really just helped everything else out, at least in my mind at the time. And so between increasing the flow, increasing the temperature, leaving the UV on, having the ozone on, and continuing to dose the hydrogen peroxide, I was like, this is going to be the thing. So
there's probably no life left after this point.
So this is the interesting thing. It's like, okay, what's left in this water? What could it be? And so I sent it off to Eli and had him take a peek at it, and confirmation, 0% Uronema, as well as like every other parasite with the exception of white spot with a 0.001%. So I had a smidgen of white spot. And in terms of like bacteria, I actually had a lot of bacteria that was still in there.
I was super curious to find out if any lived.
I was so surprised because I thought it would almost be like sterile water. That's what I was expecting, right, after all that. But in fact, the report showed that there was, I think, 22 or 50, I'd have to pull it up and look, different species of bacterium that was in there and thriving.
Nice.
So I was very happy to see that. And then looking at the genetic sequence of what was in there, the only genetic DNA that was in there was from a flounder. So there was, some like spiny flounder. That was the only bit of DNA that was in there. Yeah. Bizarre. And there was a considerable amount of it. So for whatever reason, that was the one DNA. I think when you did it, there was like frog DNA. And
there was something very random.
Yeah. So whatever. I'm not going to knock it, but what it showed me is using that concentration, which was pretty and strong, didn't kill the bacterium in the water, only the parasites. And so that to me was really fascinating. And so I thought, well, let me check the water. Let's see how cycled it is. Again, I was at zero expectations that it would be cycled. My ammonia, next to nothing. My nitrates were around between 5 and 7.
Nice.
So what that's telling me, knock on wood, is that my tank had continued to cycle throughout that time frame while it was kind of just like sitting, like incubating, if you will. So as you could see in the picture for the highlight today, I added some sand to it. I added some life source back into it. And I'm going to start adding in all of the equipment back online. Obviously, it's all thoroughly washed and stuff, but I'm hoping that I can, follow through and get some stuff into it sooner than later, because the hydrogen peroxide was more effective, going back to your point, Greg, of using bleach, because then I'd be starting completely from scratch. And now knowing that the tank could continue to cycle, I'm glad I didn't use bleach, even though I have like 20 gallons of it that I bought intentionally for this purpose. So again, I don't know if it would work the same for everyone if everyone didn't follow those particular steps, but I'm so appreciative of the community's input and suggestions and even moral support, to be honest, because I was so gutted that the hydrogen peroxide worked so well in being able to deal with the Uronema.
So I'm thoroughly amazed that you had all that bacteria that lived through all this. I know higher temperatures generally help bacteria to thrive or expand more to an extent. So, I mean, that might be something related to it. Now, in retrospect, I mean, it probably wasn't worth it. But do you think that leaving all your aged media would have kept more live bacteria?
Probably yes. Yeah, so I just pulled up the report now, and my diversity score was an 86.
Solid.
I had the phyla 13 and the classes 21. So I had a pretty diverse set of bacterium in there that I didn't even think was going to make it. But surprisingly, it lived through it, and sadly, yes. If doing this again, I now know that I would leave the bacteria or leave the media in there and let that bacteria continue to colonize on it, and that for me was a huge learning, and one of the things that I'm doing a piece on to share with others so that they can, if they want to replicate it, if they at least have my perspective. I'll be doing one for humble fish and for reef to reef as well.
Nice.
Just because I think this is such new territory, and reefing with O, I appreciate you say I'm on the cutting edge, but I feel people have been doing this before, and I'm just kind of like bringing it back up to the surface for people who were in the situation that I was in, and what to do. Now, again, huge caveat, I had nothing else alive in there, no corals, no fish. And so for me to take that risk, it was a lot easier than it would be otherwise if I had a full stock tank and plenty of fish in there. I may not have gone down the same route. I might have just said, screw it, I'm not going to add any more Anthias or any Chromis or any additional angels to it.
Yep. Now, are those the main ones that are affected by Uronema?
Yeah. So it starts with Chromis, and then it moves to Anthias, clownfish, and then to angels.
I didn't actually know what for angels.
It goes to tangs and other stuff too, but just the research that I found, the progression, that seems to be the natural evolution of who it'll attack.
Good to know. I didn't even necessarily know that the other ones would be, so good to know. Huh, that's crazy. I'm still thoroughly amazed that you had that much bacteria diversity make it through it, which is pretty crazy.
Me too. And so I have another test getting ready to send out for the March Aquabiomics, where I've been dosing the life source into it, and I'll see what that number continues to go up to and what the ratio is of all the different pieces in there. So it'll be interesting to see how the bacteria collect on the rock, if you will, and make a new home, because at that point it was just water and the glass and any surface area. There was no there was no rock in there for a period of time. So it was only when I added the rock again, it continued to colonize on that. So definitely there's room for people to test different ways of how it might colonize and at what ratios and stuff. But the aquaforest rock didn't change at all with the hydrogen peroxide. I know I was able to continue to use it, and I did change the aquascaping a little bit, but in terms of using the rock, I didn't have any problems with it.
Nice. So Sid was saying he obviously not dosing as much as you did, but he was dosing some of his main display, and corals, everything were fine. Andrew Sandler, I know he's just saying he did a similar thing with peroxide for ick in his tank. So there's definitely a lot of potential beneficial applications here.
Yeah, and I appreciate Andrew's time on being able to share his thoughts and suggestions with me on it. It gave me some peace of mind of somebody with a much larger tank and experience with using it, what it would be like, because it really is a lot of uncharted territory in its applications.
Yep, exactly. So this is the extreme use cases. I'm going to say the more common use cases is going to be as a coral dip or for killing algae in a tank. That's probably the most common.
Yeah, but the sad reality is, fish these days are coming in with it, and measures might need to get taken earlier in people's setup progression. So just to be able to know that it's an option and to have it at your disposal, I think could give some folks a little bit of peace of mind if they, if the Chromis is their first fish and they see that they come down with something, that they do have a course of action that they could use that will really start to potentially get rid of it for them as it did for me.
No, that's a great point. And a lot of new tanks do put in, a damsel or chromis, right? So
Yeah, obviously, damsels and chromises are in the same family. I don't know how a damsel would fare to it, the same or differently. I think that more folks who've tried different applications and who had used it, I definitely think that the conversation will continue to grow.
no, exactly. So what's the rest of your lifetime supply of peroxide going to be used for now?
So surprisingly, I don't have that much. Of those, that 5 gallons, I have about 2 gallons left. And I actually did use about a half gallon that I broke down into like 15, 5% containers of it. So, that is something that I was, using so I don't have to go to the store and buy, some other forms, for $1 or whatever. I had enough of it.
Okay, so Andrew, wouldn't quarantine clowns, chromis, etc. without chloroquine. What are you doing to quarantine your 2 clowns that were in there right now?
Yeah. And Philip, I see you asked the same question. And so I went the standard route for it. And so I'm doing, because it's just a little quarantine tank, for external, I used a copper-based solution. And for internal, Prezifix and is it Melifix or whatever the one you add to the food is, the CChem product. So I added the 2 of those to it, and I've been doing that for a month now. So that's where I'm trying to see what the results of that are going to be, and whether that did the trick. What I also do is every week when I do a water change, I completely empty out that tank, and I do clean that tank thoroughly, spraying it down with the hydrogen peroxide, and I freshwater dip and bathe the clownfish as well. So. Okay. I've seen no visible signs on them of the frostbite ones are mostly white, but so no visible redness on them, irritation at all, problems eating. So visually, I think I might have got it, but obviously I'm going to wait for the science to come in to see. But applying the tank transfer method plus dipping.
Wait. Tank transfer is normally 2 tanks, so you're using the same tank but just re-sterilizing it and re-putting them back in? Okay.
Yeah. So while the fish are in their freshwater dip is when I drain and clean and sterilize and dry. I use a hair dryer, dry it out, and then put it back in. And so that is my not so 2 tank transfer method.
This is the space efficient version of the tank transfer method.
Yeah, I mean, right now I've got 5 tanks going. I think my wife would how if I had another tank in there, and this one's in the pantry, so I don't even have space for another tank.
I don't blame you. I still have my temporary Zoa tank on the floor. I got a tank I'm trying to breed up Tajin behind me. It's ridiculous. I got to get back to my 2 tanks again.
Yeah, but I just touch on why it's in the pantry is because knowing that stuff can be airborne, I want it to be far enough away from anything else. So it's more than 20 feet away from the other tanks. And so it kind of looks a little funny where it is, but it was my way of also checking to make sure that I'm not using any cross-contamination there. And I have a dedicated hoses and buckets and everything for that little system is on its own. So there's, again, no cross-contamination of anything between the other systems.
And if you need to sterilize your equipment between, peroxide.
and I do. I soak everything in it now. It's like a joke of now how much I go through because I am now so sensitive to what it is and what it could be. But I don't think there's any one right or wrong way. I just found that if I can apply it as many different methods to it as possible, that'll help internally, externally, transfer, dips, baths, all of that stuff. I'm hoping that it's helping.
Yeah, I think you hit it with everything you had, and it sounds like it worked out well. It's super cool that you actually did the aquabiome, the DNA sequencing testing on the tank to confirm it was gone and see what was there. That's really cool that you actually went that extra mile to confirm it.
I have no way of knowing, right? Yeah. It would just be oh, the water is clear. I'd have no idea, and I talked to some folks about getting a microscope and checking and looking, but it's even if I could identify something in there and it was cells of something, I wouldn't know if it was alive. I wouldn't know if it's replicating. So, being able to send it out, it really gave me that peace of mind to know that I was able to see what it is and then, how to see that it was taken care of. So, again, extreme situation, but I did want to put Chromis and Antheus and Angels in there. And so this is, the path that I had taken to get to that point. And I'll be honest, it wasn't cheap to do all this either. It was just like both time consuming and, to get new product and everything to replace that. So it's an investment on many levels.
Yep, exactly. Okay, now I'm curious to see. I know Sid has a big tank, but he was just saying how much he dosed because he has fish, corals, everything else in there.
Yeah.
And he was saying I dosed 150 mil 4 times throughout the day, and then 40 mils every 15 minutes, adding for 30 days. Now, how many gallons did your tank, Sid? For perspective here. I know it's definitely a few hundred gallons, but
yeah,
it's a big tank. But just kind of curious because I know coral, everything else was in there when he was doing it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is it'll start to oxidize immediately. So however it's being dripped in, if he's putting it into the sump or into the tank directly, the moment it hits salt water, it's starting to work. So it will also begin to work in his sump if that's where he's putting it, and up all of the pipes and stuff as well. So if you've got things that are in your pipes and you're not able to clean them out, that's a good way to think about if you want to dose it. Do it in the sump so it'll work its way through. Yeah, 650 gallons.
Yeah.
Otherwise, once you put it into the tank, then it'll be diluted by the time it goes through into your sump. So again, that's just a little thing. And Sid, I'm not sure which way that you were dosing it, but those two different applications. If you put it into the tank, your sump will be a little bit less diluted.
Now, here's another thought, I guess. So hydrogen peroxide oxidizes stuff, right?
Yep.
So does ozone. I'm just trying to think like the correlations, or could you accomplish the same thing with either tool? But I guess they're hitting different parts of the water as it goes.
So that's one of the things I asked. And even my Poseidon 200, the concentration that I would need would not be high enough to achieve the results on its own, right? So it will help, the 200 to really like take the edge off, if you will. But from a full like oxidization, annihilation, you would need one of the bigger, more industrial models, like in the waste treatment facilities, to use than I had access to at home.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Because that was one of my questions right off the bat. Is that if I didn't need to do anything rather than just turn on my my ozone, then I would have done that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, ORP crashes with peroxide, so ozone stays on.
Yeah, that's right, and it will continue to go up based on the amount of nutrients, the NO3 plus that you have in your tank.
Now,
what I found actually, and I didn't keep it on there for a long period of time, Andrew, but I did, look for, what my ORP ratio was, when I would add the hydrogen peroxide and then when the ozone was on, and, definitely the hydrogen peroxide did drop it, but there was an interesting stabilization that occurred when I was doing them both simultaneously. I didn't get, the 375 to 400 that I normally like, but it didn't also drop it to 270, 280 when normally putting the hydrogen peroxide. So interesting thing of being able to look at some of the science between how it levels off. And Sid, whether you notice any differences when you're adding it at the volume and increment, whether your ORP goes through these like little spikes and valleys and goes back up again. Again, these are the things to geek out and wonder about.
The rabbit holes we come down.
Yeah, and like even for folks who have like I believe it's the Mastertronic who has that the sensor to look at like pollutants and
water clarity, the OLI
water clarity. Yeah, it's like how would that differ compared to ORP? In this type of situation, where how would it change it if you're using just hydrogen peroxide or using it with ozone? And I don't have that probe, so I wouldn't be able to test. But
I might try this and find out.
That's an interesting area where you're not just relying on ORP, but you're looking at the oxygen level at whole of what it's like. So yeah, if you do that test, let me know.
Yeah, maybe I will do a couple days of dosing. So yeah, I'm interested now too. So many things to learn.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on to be able to share this. And I shared a couple posts here and there about it, and people who specifically asked. But I really wanted to make sure that it was gone in the tank before I started talking about it, because I didn't want to spout out false information or half truths because I didn't have the data available. But now that the data has come in, I feel it's more appropriate to be able to share. Again, this is my experience of what I did and the path that I took. It may not work for you. You may have to do it slightly different, but at least it starts to get people thinking about and having the discussion about how to use hydrogen peroxide in different forms.
Yep. So, no, that's exactly right. So we kill algae. You can use it to sterilize the system more or less of the bad stuff, and apparently save your bacteria, which is like a huge win because you
An unknown win.
You keep your cycle going. It's technically a lot easier way to clean all your gear, all your pumps, everything, because you're kind of cleaning in one shot, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and I can't say the same about bleach. If I was to do it with bleach, I have a feeling, again, I don't know this, that the bacterium in there wouldn't make it. Although hydrogen peroxide is a lot stronger and more concentrated, this is a testable proposition that I just didn't do, but it'd be worth looking at.
Yeah. Okay. So I have never used your crazy high percentage. I've only ever used 3%. Yeah. So would dosing 3 times the volume at 3% be the same as dosing a third of the volume of a higher percentage?
No, because it's always going to stay at 3%. You're just increasing, the volume that you dosed. So if you did 10 mil, 100 mil, and 1,000 mil, you're still going to stay at 3% hydrogen peroxide because that's just how it was made.
Okay. No, I was just curious how that played out. I've never considered the math that direction. Shelly, thank you for the $5 super chat.
Yes, and I see that there's 90 people watching here. If you could do a favor, smash that like button, subscribe if you're not already. Show Dev some of that love that we have for him doing this every week.
Doing my job for me, thank you. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story today because you definitely had some much more extreme uses of hydrogen peroxide than I've ever done. So I'm happy to hear it worked out. I mean, sorry that you had to go through the Uronema. That definitely sucks. But at least we learned something and your tank is back to the happy place now.
Yeah, so now I got some exciting things coming down the pike for it. The lighting is the next big thing. Setting up all of the equipment is coming in. So there's definitely some big things that I'll be posting about in the coming weeks. But I'm excited, to be able to finally put the stuff that's in the holding tanks into the tank and just see it have some life again. It's any reefer out there will know if their tank isn't doing so well, they're not doing so well. And I feel
so
that
true.
to my heart, to my core, that when it's not well, I'm not well. And I apologize for people who have to deal with me when that's the case. But I'm so glad that it's getting to the point where I can re-add stuff back into it and see what the potentials are and really start to put corals in it and see it really flourish. Because I spent a lot of time with the aquascaping and really thinking through every detail of this build. And now I can finally start to see it come to life again.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So definitely excited to see when you start getting it stocked and rolling, you're going to have to come back on and show off the tank.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do so. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Will, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Thank you guys. All right. I will not keep you too long today, but thanks again for coming on today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. As always, smash that like button if you enjoyed it. Show us some love. Aaron, thank you, sir. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome, Devin. Reefers,